Belum ada suaranya. Filmnya lagi OTW ya. Oh, nggak apa-apa. Tenang. Oh ini memang yang ini mungkin
what do you call influence how the power of buying from the society of Indonesia with the basic commodities, health services, education service, social service, and some type of other service is given with the VAT exemption facility. So this is why actually right now from April to now, we have some more revenue from VAT and not so, if I can say that of the 1st January of 2025. Of course, the state budget has to be in the health condition. Right now, during the pandemic, our state budget is not in the healthy condition where the deficit is more than 3%, which is considered not healthy. But hopefully, by the time next year, actually, we have to get back to the deficit of 3%, which is start to make the state budget become in the healthy line again. Also, there's a special rate in VAT for simplicity in collecting, like a final VAT is applied on certain type of goods and services or certain business sector. For example, there's 1% and then 2% of 3% of the business turnover, which is regulated in the Ministry of Finance regulation, which come into active into regulated in 1st April also. There are 14 new regulation on the VAT in the Ministry of Finance decree or regulation. That's all about the VAT actually, but right now I would like to let you know that where the money goes from the tax. I'm sure most of you probably know, but this is the real count of from the state budget that every 1 million that you pay for tax, it will goes like 283,000 to for transfer to region and village. So it's not just the government in the head quarter, which is uh, organize all the tax revenue, but it is also transferred into the region and village. Then there is also 51,000 for health, and then for defense 49,591. There's also for education or 62,339. So this is all just to describe the where your tax money goes. So because sometimes they or we pay tax is so this is hard, and tax is implemented by the law. It's not just because we are from the tax office. Okay, and now we this is the real example I think that we all has experienced or has we make use of this tax money for vaccine in the COVID-19 vaccine. And there are also a program of economic recovery, which is we have like some for social protection, and then for corporate, for health, of course, and then priority program and also business incentive. This is just the allocation of the state budget for the economic recovery. Last slide from me for today's seminar is that this is actually for the young generation actually. For those who are not having the TIN number yet, the tax identification number yet, please try to understand how the state budget is work, so you know that the money is come from taxpayers to the country. It's not to the pocket of someone, but it is for the government. Is it for the country to then will allocate all this budget to many things that need for the development of the country. And with this budget, with this revenue, we try to provide facilities and public services for all the society of Indonesia, for all people of Indonesia. So what I want you as the young generation, you have to get the role. Don't be such a free rider. Try to understand where the money goes, where the tax money goes, and you understand how the state revenue or state budget works. So then at the time when you need to pay your tax, you will do it voluntarily, not because you are forced by someone or because you're the one who work with you like cutting your salary with the tax and everything like that, but you have to do it voluntarily. Please get your TIN number voluntarily. You're not a free rider. The free rider is the one who just want to enjoy without contributing anything. You've been enjoying so many facilities from the country. Please try to contribute by the time you have to do that. I think that's all what I want to present today, Putra, and thank you very much for your attention. We look forward for the discussion session. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Putra.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bu Inge. So to sum up, you touch on several points. I would like to give out these summaries of what you've just said. So Bu Inge just showed us how important the tax regulation, the harmonization of tax regulation is for Indonesia. She points out the efficiency of Indonesia is still quite low, not that low, but still quite low at 63%. There are too many goods that are non-taxable, and also the average rate of the VAT or sales tax around the world is around 15%. Also, she has a very special message for those young people who are going to enter the workforce in not so far future. Don't be a free rider. So that's important. That's not only Bu Inge, but also I think it goes to Bu Menteri, also speaks on that tone. Thank you, Bu Inge. We wish that you can stay for the discussion at the end of this session. We'll go to our next two speakers. We've heard from the government side. Now we'll go to the practitioners, the researchers from Capabuild, Bu Gitte, and Mr. Prem. How are you? Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. This is Prem.
Okay, Mr. Prem. Bu Gitte?
I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. So thank you again for joining us in this session of our discussion. Before we begin, Mr. Prem and Bu Gitte, I would like to introduce you to our audience. So the first one is for Bu Gitte, Dr. Gitte Heij to be specific. She gained her Master of Law, International Fiscal Law, Law of Developing Countries, Law of Indonesia, from University of Groningen in the Netherlands, with a thesis on Indonesian corporate tax and investment laws. In 2007, she obtained her PhD in law, also from University of Groningen for fiscal sociology, applied to tax law policy reform processes in Indonesia and Vietnam. Her career spans to, she was or is international banking management trainee at ING Bank, international research and advisory work for governments and companies, and she also is a Asia Research Center at Murdoch University in Western Australia. She's also a professional member of OECD Government Foresight Community Network, member of Public Sector Foresight Network, fellow associate Asian Law Center, Melbourne University, and associate of the Intern Bureau for Fiscal Documentation. Welcome, Bu Gitte. And
My
now,
pleasure.
thank you. And now for Mr. Prem. He obtained his master's in law, specifically in tax law, from the University of Leiden. His vast experiences include international tax expert and trainer slash teacher on cross-border taxation issues, Principals Research Associate Tax Services, IBFD, member of the Supervisory Board, MEEZ Holland Noord, Senior Registrar at the Hague Court of Appeal, Senior Tax Associate, Wijdeema van Tol, Attorneys and Tax Advisors, Senior Tax Manager at Deloitte, Netherlands, member of the Dutch Association for Tax Science, member of the Dutch Association of International Law, and member of the Dutch Association of Tax Advisors. So very, very vast experience. Speakers we have with us here today, everyone. So the floor will be yours, Bu Gitte and Mr. Prem. But before that, I would like to remind everyone to just take advantage of this session and ask away in the last session. So Bu Gitte, Pak Prem, the floor is yours. Mr. Prem, I think you're still on mute. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm still on mute. Sorry for that. Thank you for the introduction. We have our wizard among us from Australia. It's Gary. And Gary is going to share the screen because both Gitte and I, we are, how should I tell it? We are good tax lawyers, but lousy technicians. So Gary is going to assist us in sharing the slides. First of all, it is until what time do we have? It is now 9:30 in the Netherlands. How long do we have for this presentation?
I believe we are given 45 minutes, sir, for your you and Dr. Gitte.
Okay, we stick to that agenda. First, I want to correct something, if I may. You just informed us that Inge is from the Indonesian government and we are from the private practice. Well, I was from the private practice and also Gitte in the past, but now we are from Capabuild. And Capabuild is a training institution. So we use our knowledge to provide trainings, and where we can put in some practical views. But we are not, right now we are not from practice. So we are not tax advisors or tax lawyers. We were in the past. So that's something I want to make clear. Okay, given the 45 minutes, we have a strict timing here. So let's start away with the agenda. What we want to cover, both Gitte and I, is I have some big picture diagrams from the OECD, where we can compare Indonesia with other countries and regions. Then in the middle, we have a nice short video on Indonesian VAT and crypto assets. We should not forget that crypto assets is recently also brought within the scope of Indonesian VAT at a special rate. And we did a nice webinar some weeks ago with PKN STAN on this subject. And we made a nice summary, so it will last around 10 minutes. So please watch that video in the middle, and then we will have Dr. Gitte Heij from Capabuild, and she will talk a bit about why VAT and what are the general policy considerations. And in order to increase interactivity, because we don't like to only speak, a one-way street, but also have a feel with our audience. That's very important when we give training. So we have built in our presentations, we have built in some POLEF questions, and Gary will explain when the moment is there. Gary will explain how to get to those POLEF questions and provide your answers. So this is, I have 15 minutes, then 10 minutes videos, and then 20 minutes by Gitte. Okay, Gary, can we show the first slide? This is an important one. Inge already talked a bit about it, and she is more strict than I will be because I'm not from Indonesia, and Inge just clearly said the tax to GDP ratio in Indonesia is too low. It should become higher. And my intention with this slide is to show you, to compare it. You have at the right side, you have Indonesia, which shows that for 2019, I should say, I understood from the press that in 2020, 21, and even 22, the tax to GDP ratio has dropped a bit, around 10%, 9 or 10%. But in 2019, it was 11.6%. And, I hope that people understand what GDP is. GDP is the total value of everything produced within a country's borders. So what this ratio want to tell us is you have gross domestic products, GDP, and part of it is tax. And in Indonesia, it is only 11.6%, especially when you compare it with the average in the APEC region, which is 21%, and in the OECD countries, which is 34%. I'm not going to judge it, whether it is too high or too low or should decrease. That I leave it to Inge, because, you know, to judge a country on its tax to GDP ratio, you have to understand everything of that country, the economy, the history, the tradition, the amount of taxpayers, the tax base. A lot of factors depend on what makes the tax to GDP ratio. The only thing I wanted to show here with is Indonesia is on the lower end with its tax to GDP ratio. Okay, let's go to the next slide, and then we can see a sort of historical overview of this ratio for Indonesia, and we see that the highest ratio in this period, and the period is from 2007 until and including 2019, the highest ratio in this period was in 2008. It was 13%, 13%. And the lowest in this period was in 2009. It was around 11%. But again, in the years after 2019, especially when COVID hit the world, we also saw a drop in this ratio in Indonesia. So another important thing is the next slide is the tax structure of a country. And with tax structure, we mean the share of each tax in the total tax revenues. And if we look at Indonesia, which is the top part of this diagram, we see that the highest share of tax revenue in Indonesia for 2019 was derived from value-added taxes, and the green part was 28%, and other goods and services tax. And with other goods and services tax, we mean excises and customs and import duties. But I think we should count them up together. So if you look at Indonesia, we see that the biggest part, the highest share of tax revenues in Indonesia was derived from these indirect taxes, VAT, excise taxes, import duties, which amounts to around 41%. And the second highest in Indonesia in this year was derived from corporate income tax, the blue part, which is 32%. So it shows that the indirect taxes in Indonesia, it's important. It's an important issue, an important part. And what struck me when I looked at this table is that the 41% in Indonesia is even higher than the OECD average of 32%. So perhaps that's a good sign. I don't know. But this is what I wanted to show you. And we should also note that tax structures, they vary significantly across countries. And if you look at these schedules, then you will see that consumption taxes, so like VAT, they are more relevant today than in 1990. So indirect taxes become more relevant. And I also see it in the rest of the world than direct taxes. Inge showed the slide where she illustrated the drop in corporate income taxes going forward. and the increase in indirect taxes. So that's an important sign that indirect taxes, the relevance of indirect taxes increases going forward. The next slide shows you a poll of questions, and I will give that to Gary.
Thank you very much, Prem. So as Prem mentioned at the start of the presentation, at Capabuild, we are very much a training organisation. And part of that training is about understanding you as participants, not just your understanding, but also your perspectives. So into the chat, I've just put a link which is to pollev.com/Capabuild. And what we would like you to do is to click on that link, and that link will actually bring you to 2 questions for you to ask. Given what Inge has already presented and also Pak Prem, it's going to ask your opinion on tax matters in Indonesia. So if you could please click on that link and join into this interactive session. Pak Prem has also already mentioned that we do love your interactivity. The important thing about this is that it is anonymous, that we are simply seeking a general feel for your perspectives on 2 questions. Now, these 2 questions are going to ask you your opinion on the different levels, and I can see that there's already quite a few of you in there. So what I'll do is I will actually now, Pak Prem, share that perspective that is being given, and if you like, you can start to comment on those points of view. And so let's have a look at the first one, which is Indonesia's tax to GDP ratio.
Mungkin lah.
So to our participants, while these views are being put forward, please keep on going on these first 2 questions. Prem, at the moment, most or a little bit less than half believe that Indonesia's tax to GDP ratio is too low compared to other countries.
Yeah, I see that people have difficulty in choosing B or C. I think the answer that the tax to GDP ratio of Indonesia is perfect indeed. That's a very small minority, 8% now, and the majority is more than 50% says it is too low to compare to other countries, and Indonesia should start taking measures to bring its informal economy into the tax net. That's what I hear from people, from scholars outside of Indonesia, that when Indonesia wants to increase its tax revenues, it also have to look at its informal economy and try to bring informal economy within the scope of taxation in Indonesia. And where they look at is this tax to GDP ratio. And of course, the last possibility, the third possibility, is that it may increase substantially in view of the recent VAT measures regarding e-commerce, crypto assets, and the rise in the VAT ratio, which is true, because it yields a lot of tax revenue, hopefully going forward. These are recent measures, so we will have to wait and see. But I can understand the struggle between B and C. Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question. Yeah, the answer you agree with the most. And the proposition is, I believe that Indonesia's consumption tax to its total revenue ratio, so the indirect tax in comparison with the total tax revenue, it should be higher in view of the big consumers market in Indonesia. 75% of you guys have chosen that one, and only 25% said it's fine since it is higher than the OECD ratio. So what I hear from you guys is that the indirect tax to total tax ratio should become higher because of the big consumer market in Indonesia. Okay, nice to hear and see that. Shall we proceed with the slides? I have a couple of minutes, so I will go fast. Yeah, the next slide is also, this one. It shows you the number of countries which introduced VAT, value added tax, over time. It starts with 1964 with almost 0 countries having a VAT in their tax laws. And if you compare that with 2020, where we see that around, between 160 and 170 countries have introduced VAT. So this slide also shows you how important the introduction of a VAT is in countries. Indonesia is not standing on its own. There are 165, if not more, countries that have introduced VAT over time. And the next slide will show you, once a country has introduced a VAT, value added tax, you see that this is a slide which shows you the period 2005, between 2005 and 2020. 2005 are the green dots on the diagram, and the pillars are 2020. So what you see in all these countries is that once there is a VAT, the VAT rates tends to go up rather than to go down. So the green dots give you the rates in 2005, and the black or gray ones give you the rates in 2020. So you see an increase. If you look at the OECD, you also see an increase in the VAT rates, and also within the EU, the European Union, you see an increase in the VAT rates. The only country that reduced its VAT rates I see quickly is Canada. Canada has a VAT rate of 7%. And this diagram also shows you that VAT rates can vary between countries. Like in Hungary, it's a country in Europe. Hungary has the highest VAT rate, which is 27%. And as I told you a minute ago, Canada has the lowest one, which is 7%. And if you look at it from a global perspective, you can see that almost 2/3 of the OECD countries have VAT rates of 20% or higher. Then let's move on to a very interesting sector, and that's the digital sector. I wanted to compare Indonesia with the European Union. You know, you have these digital giants. We call them e-commerce entrepreneurs, like you have in Indonesia, Tokopedia, like Alibaba, like Amazon and Netflix. If you look at these e-commerce multinationals, you have to make a distinction between the delivery, the supply of physical goods, and the supply of what we call intangible goods. Like a company like Netflix, it supplies digital goods only. It's not physical. But if you go to Alibaba or Tokopedia, you can buy physical goods like a dress or shoes or refrigerators, whatever. They offer a lot of these goods. So make a distinction between those two and take a big picture look at it. And what we see when we compare these e-commerce entrepreneurs between the European Union and Indonesia, we see that recently within the European Union, a tax-free import of 22 euros was abolished. And the idea behind it is that if a foreign e-commerce company supplies goods, whether physical or whether intangible, to a country in the EU and you have this 22 threshold, 22 euro, it can distort the economy within the EU because it doesn't create, it creates a difference between buying the goods from a company within the EU, because then from €1 you have to pay VAT, while if you buy the same goods from a company outside of the euro, you only have to pay VAT when it is above 22 euros. The same thing Indonesia did. Indonesia lowered its tax-free import from $75 to $3. So $3 is still, it's a low amount. It's almost nothing. So it didn't abolish it at all completely like in the EU, but it lowered the tax-free import amount threshold. Then what we see again within this e-commerce sector, that recently the EU said all the goods, the digital goods and services and also the physical goods, we are going to change from the origin principle to the destination principle. What does it mean? Origin principle means that the VAT rate applies of the country where the supplier of the goods is located. So, for instance, in Europe, we have Amazon. Amazon is located in Luxembourg, not without reason, apart from the direct tax reasons. There was an important indirect tax reason because the Luxembourg had a very low VAT rate of 15%. Now they have increased it to 17%, but it's still at the lower end of the VAT rates in Europe. So what happens is, if you change from the origin principle, so the Luxembourg VAT rate would be applicable, to a destination principle, then it means that the VAT rate of the country where the goods are bought, so where the consumer is located, the VAT rate of that country applies. So you can imagine that in the past, people from Hungary, they wanted to buy goods from Amazon in Luxembourg because the VAT rate was 15% compared to their own 27%. And now, because of this destination principle, they have to pay 27%. It also has an impact on the profits of these multinationals, but that's a separate part. Also, Indonesia took measures recently, and Indonesia said that e-commerce transactions have to be subject to Indonesian VAT, which is currently 11%. And if you look at how they included these e-commerce multinationals into the VAT net, then that's the third bullet. They said, the law says in Indonesia that foreign e-commerce businesses, they are appointed as VAT collectors, and they should register in Indonesia for VAT purposes. And we are not talking about small money here. It really hits the foreign e-commerce businesses like Samsung and Disney Plus, Shopify, YouTube, Alibaba, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, Spotify, Twitter, etc., etc. These are really the big guys within the e-commerce sector. So they are appointed as VAT collectors and they have to register. And if you read the papers, the newspapers, and the tax magazines, you will see that they are queuing up to register in Indonesia and to remit 11% on their sales to the Indonesian tax authorities. So before this, Netflix was not subject to 11%, and after this measure, Netflix has to pay 11%. It's not Netflix, but ultimately it's the consumer, but Netflix is appointed as a VAT collector. In Europe, we have another system which I wanted to share with you. It's called the one-stop shop mechanism. And what does it mean? It means that if a foreign e-commerce business supplies goods or services to different countries in the EU, then normally it has to register in all those countries where it does business. And now, because the EU is one big market and VAT is sort of harmonized within the EU, the European Commission came up with this proposal recently and said, guys, these foreign enterprises, you can make use of a one-stop shop mechanism. So you register in one country, and that country will, you have to pay the VAT rates of the countries where you do business, pay that to that country where you are registered, and that country will remit VAT to the other countries within the EU. And let me illustrate it with the next slide, the VAT rates. The last bullet, of course, it speaks for itself. But Gary, let me just quickly explain this one-stop shop. So suppose you have a supplier in the Netherlands and it provides goods and services to a customer in Germany, which is DE, Germany, and the other one is France. Then this supplier can register in one country. In this example, it is the Netherlands under this one-stop shop OSS mechanism. So the supplier will pay 90 plus 20, being the VAT rates in Germany and the VAT rate in France, to the Dutch tax authorities, and the Dutch tax authorities will make sure that Germany and France will receive 19 and 20 respectively. So this is in short how this one-stop shop mechanism works. Then we have a poll question, and then Gitte has the floor.
Thank you very much, Prem. So we do, in fact, invite participants to head back to Polev. So if you click on that link once again, that is in the chat, we have 2 more questions for you based on some of the propositions that Prem has given to you. So as you can see in the chat there is the link polev.com/Capabuild. So we ask you again to jump on there. Now, we had a lot of you joining in on those last 2 questions. We do encourage everyone who is present in the webinar to jump on that link. And we ask that you give your honest and anonymous opinion. And what I'll do is we can share those thoughts and we will be able to comment on them, and Prem will be able to give his opinion as we go. So those 2 questions are 2 new questions that we're asking you. And we're just giving you a little bit of time now to fill that in. But I can see that, Prem, we've already got huge engagement there. There's a lot of people who've jumped in, and I'll present your findings. And what you'll see is that this will change very quickly because we've just got the initial answers going in so far. If you are there in the webinar contributing your thoughts, don't worry about what's already on the screen because those answers may not be correct. They're just the initial thoughts of some of our participants. But Prem, you'll see things will change very rapidly. We've had hundreds of people joining in and giving their thoughts. So the statement that they agree with the most is all of the above at the moment.
Yeah, which is the correct answer. I will give the answer because we have the time we have to take into account. And Gitte has a nice story. So all of the above is the right answer. Because VAT is a consumption tax, and I've explained why you should apply the destination principle, that it is better than the origin principle, because it creates a level playing field in the country of the ultimate consumers. If you give this, I gave you the example of Luxembourg, 17%, and Hungary, 27%. then you will understand that clients in Hungary will be inclined to order their goods at Amazon and not at their own business in Hungary because of this huge difference in VAT rates. So the destination principle is a more fair principle than the origin principle. In general, VAT rates tends to go up rather than go down. Well, we don't have to go too deep into that because the OECD, I showed you the OECD slides where between 2005 and 2020, we saw that a lot of countries have increased their VAT rates instead of decreasing it. Only Canada was the one exception, which went down to 7%. And the third one, the appointment as VAT collectors and obligation to register applicable to foreign e-commerce platforms is a good thing since it creates a level playing field between foreign and domestic marketplaces. It's also a correct statement. So all of the above, 47%, it's a nice outcome. Thank you, Gary.
That's right. Now the final one of these poll-evs, and this is an interesting one because this is a ranking exercise. So we've asked people to move these up and down based on which they think are the fairest, based on our last presentation. And so far we have corporate at the top, but I did notice that this is while we have more people contributing. I noticed that when we only had a few, it was actually personal was at the top. And so there are a lot of people who are still putting their opinions in here. But so this might change, but there are a lot of different votes going in at the moment. And at the moment it's staying there at corporate as the fairest, personal as the second fairest, and then VAT is down the bottom. So, Prem, would you like to comment on that?
I don't know whether corporate is the fairest tax or personal income tax. Let me see what the background of this question is. I think Gitte can comment on this one. The question comes from Gitte, I think.
It did indeed. I will elaborate on this because I really want to get a feel from the audience what they think, because I think a lot of the concerns and complaints about increasing VAT relate to this question, and I am very curious to hear from the participants what their view is. And so it's not a judgment or right or wrong. It is, what do you think is the fairest? And what we do know, and I will go into that in a minute, is that VAT is not a progressive tax. And progressive means that if you're rich, you pay more than if you're poor. It is actually the opposite. So if we look at these results, then people believe that a corporate tax, if you as a company make profit and you get taxed on it, that is a fair way of collecting tax. And personal tax can be progressive as well, and it is in Indonesia, but it's not generating that much revenue. But it is fairer than a VAT. But a VAT is easier, and it's the balancing act. And we come to that in a moment. I really wanted to get a snapshot from the participants, how they perceive the different taxes. And there's, again, no right or wrong. Let me be very clear. There is no right or wrong. But there are many different views out there. Thank you.
Okay, I think, Gary, we can go on with the slides for Gitte.
I do want to mention that what we had in mind was to actually show you a video of a summary of the crypto webinar we did on crypto assets and VAT with PKN STAN. But we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask Gary, who is always our person who keeps us sane during these presentations and keeps us on track there to put that in the chat so you can look at that separately whilst I present the next part. And that is why VAT and some background and some policy issues. Before I start that, I want to really thank Pekan STAN for inviting us as Capabuild. Capabuild is a public-private partnership. That means that we have funding from the Dutch government, we have funding from private industry, and we work very closely together with the Committee on Fiscal Studies at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And we work also very closely with Pekan STAN and FETA, and we're very proud of that, and we're very honored to be here today. I want to pay special thanks to Pak Mowanto, who we start to get to know better and better because we give these webinars regularly, and to Ibu Inge for a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. And I also want to say we would not be here if it was not for Mbak Dina, because Mbak Dina worked for FETA as a moderator, and we got to know her, and she moved to Pekan STAN to do further studies, and she's on the committee for the National Tax Fair 2022, and she persuaded us to join you today. So, Mbak Dina, thank you. And we look forward to the presentation after me, which is from Pak Moore, whose name is quite familiar for many. At least it is for me, and I look forward to his presentation. I want to briefly talk about why VAT. The key issue is with indirect taxes that those who collect it don't pay it. And yes, Gary, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And why is this important now? In times of COVID, when a lot of countries in the global south have suffered so badly, and that is due to the lack of solidarity and cooperation by countries that have large pharmaceutical industries, like Germany, like the Netherlands, like the UK. So why now? Many countries actually have reduced their VAT because it's a time of hardship for many. And Indonesia has done some things. It has like reduced VAT on items that relate to COVID. So any equipment, any vaccinations, anything to do with the pandemic, they actually have accommodated that in the VAT system. And the question is, why would you now raise the VAT, although it's only 1%? It's not that major. And I have to say personally, I have incredible admiration for your Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani. And I think if she comes up with this, there is a reason. And I think she's extremely smart, and she is very, very thorough. So why would she do this? Indonesia needs a lot of capital, and it is a capital importing country. It means it doesn't have enough money in the banks to finance, for example, new infrastructure projects. And it wants to grow. It has incredible potential. It's one of the largest and most powerful economies in the Asian region, and in 10 years' time, it's one of the most powerful countries in the world. And that is the reality. So it needs revenue to invest in infrastructure and in health and in many other areas. And imagine you try to think of how would you get there? How would you get there? And VAT is quite a solid source of revenue. Imagine you're Dubai or Iraq and you have no VAT. It's because you have lots of oil, But oil prices can go up and down. Or maybe in 10 years' time, no one wants to buy your oil. That's uncertainty. VAT gives a certain base, and that is what's really attractive about it. Next slide, Gary. Thank you. And we need to look at this really carefully, because we get foreign advices in, and we in Capabuild, when we train with partners in Indonesia, or the last few weeks we have trained with Botswana Government Revenue Service, we've trained with members from Kenya Civil Society and Government Revenue Services and other parts of the African continent, and we see that it's very different per country, as Prem so well said. We need to be so careful in comparing, and we need to take the history into consideration. And we say in Capabuild always three things. There is no such thing as one truth. There are many different views. So someone from IMF, an economist, may favor a VAT. And you need to ask yourself why. Because they come from a country where it's easy to collect, the compliance costs are low, and it just makes sense. But it doesn't mean it makes sense in your country. So always think about who says it and why. And in Capabuild, we say tax is not an island, so you need to really look at the context. And thirdly, we're very demand-driven. So when Dina came with this topic, we said, okay, if that's what you want, that's what we will present. But we are all influenced by our own backgrounds. I'm trained in the Netherlands. I live in Australia, and I remember when the Australian form of VAT was introduced in Australia, and it was a big deal because Australia has lots of mining resources, and people wondered why you needed a VAT. It turned out to be a GST, but it shows per country it differs. What is very good of a VAT is in a digital economy, when you don't have a physical presence of a company in your country. And for the third year students, this is about, permanent establishments or having a physical presence on the ground. If you don't have that and you want to catch a Tokopedia or a Netflix or an Alibaba, you need to think creatively. And then the platforms are a wonderful place to start with, making them the collectors of VAT. So I know they also have to register now for the private electronic system, and they're rushing to do that because otherwise they're not allowed to operate in Indonesia. And I think that's a splendid move. As I said, it creates more certainty around the revenue stream. You can predict it better. It's quite easy to collect because the one who collects is not the one who carries the burden. And then there's another reason that we forget, and that is demography, aging. If you live in a country, and Indonesia is not part of it, let me be clear, but imagine you live in Japan, and you see an aging population. That means people live off their pensions, if they have any, and they're lucky if they do. In many countries, people don't have that. Then people are not paying personal income tax anymore because the income has gone down, or in some countries, pension income is exempt or has a lower rate. But you still want these people to pay tax. And particularly if you have a large part of your population that's very old and not working, how are you going to capture that? Because the more old people you have, you need to be creative. And that's when a VAT becomes quite attractive. And that demography element is very important in Europe with an aging population. And Indonesia doesn't have that problem. Nigeria doesn't have that problem. You are the economies of the future. The same applies to India, but not to China. because China is facing this problem too of an aging population. But a VAT makes sense for those countries with aging populations. Next slide, please. And we need to be so careful in comparing one country to another. And we heard from Ibu Inge about the VAT in Singapore, and I remember when it was introduced, and people think that, you know, the VAT in Singapore is quite low, but imagine you want to buy a car in Singapore. Those of you who know something about Singapore will go, yeah, that's almost impossible. That's true. So they have other indirect taxes that make it very difficult to consume certain services. And their VAT may be low, but if you want to rent something in Singapore, Crown land is all owned by the government. That's where they get a lot of their revenue from. And therefore they can have lower VAT. But it doesn't mean that it's more attractive from that perspective, because they have other costs that you don't have in Indonesia. One of the things that is very important, and that is often misunderstood by those who come from countries with perfectly run administration systems, that they think, oh, VAT is the answer. But a VAT requires technology, good access to internet, electricity access, and we train a lot in African countries, and 70% of people have no reliable electricity access. And that makes it a lot harder. And you also need to understand bookkeeping. And not everyone does. And not everyone can read and write. These are the realities. And we need to be careful in, oh, that country is doing that, we should do the same. Because you need to look at what's feasible in your own country. And Indonesia has been very successful in implementing a VAT, because it is very, it had a large exemption, so a lot of companies were not obliged to do it, but it differs per country, and it's so important to take these things into consideration. And you must always look at the exemptions, like Ibu Inge did so well. You can say, oh, it's this much in this country, but how on earth can you, for example, some countries exempt leasing of private jets, planes, to travel to another country, and it's tax exempt from VAT. And you go, why? These people are really rich. Next slide. What we see is that, why is it not a best tax for people who are poor? And when we talk about poverty, we talk about women and children. They are the main ones in the category of the poorest in society in many countries. If you increase the GST or VAT by 1%, it means that the poorest people feel it the most. If if the VAT rises 1% for me, because I live in a rich country and I have a middle income salary, then it doesn't really matter. I don't feel it. But if you are a low income earner, you'll feel it. And if you're a middle or high income earner, well, you may not go on a particular holiday to Bali, but that's about it. That's a very different story. And women and children are really the main victims of an increase in VAT. Next slide. So how to resolve this VAT challenge? A lot of experts say, keep it simple. And that's always a political debate, because everyone wants an exemption and mining doesn't want to be included, and all these things come up. You need a balance between direct and indirect taxes. Also, when the economy goes down or up, that you have that balance, because if an economy is in a booming phase, corporate tax income is important. It's also very important to strengthen the income tax rates for individuals and make it progressive. If you earn a lot of money, you pay more tax, and that's only fair. And it's also important to make essential goods exempt. If you don't do that, it is very, very harsh on the poorest in your country. And we've seen examples of that, of harsh implementation. I've seen it close up in New Zealand, and it's heartbreaking. It's not the way to do it. Next slide. What experts say is how you compensate those poor people if you actually implement a VAT. What you do is you make sure that you have transfers to the lowest paid households, low income. That's not always easy to reach. It sounds wonderful from a desk chair in Europe, but it's not that easy to do. And we see what Indonesia has done is do these regional transfers to compensate those in particularly rural areas to receive compensation for any increases in tax, be it VAT. But be mindful that most of the decisions are made by people who are not in that position. And I appeal very much to the women in the audience now. Women and children are the poorest in society. And we need to really be mindful of that most policymakers have no idea. So we always need to check, what does this mean for a woman who's a farmer, who doesn't own land, who goes to the markets, the informal payments she has to make don't change, and the VAT goes up by 1%, and certain items she has to buy include VAT. That hurts a lot, and we need to be mindful of that. But it can be rectified, and there's no doubt about it. VAT is here to stay, and it will only go one way, and that is up in rates, because in the current digital economy, it is a very useful tool. Thank you. I'm over to Gary. I think that was the last slide, and we go to some poll of questions, and I apologize for going over time.
All right, thank you very much, Gitte, and thank you to all of the participants. What I've done is, given the fact that we have crept over the time, is I've just given you the link to pollev.com/Capabuild, and we have two final questions there for you to answer. So we do request that you answer those, and they will provide us at Capabuild with lots of valuable information and perspective on the presentation. So Gitte, we could look at question 5 if you liked, or would you like to end it here?
I feel we're out of time. I look at the moderators if we can have a look at the questions. Otherwise, we may have that during the table discussion later on that I quickly respond to. Thank you. Let's do that.
Well, I think we have a little bit time to show the poll, so I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we do invite all of the participants to have a go at this. This first one is giving you the opportunity to be the Minister for Finance, if only. And your job is to increase revenue. So we are asking you what the order of your focus would be. Obviously, this is a huge task to be the Minister for Finance. So this is a ranking exercise. And we ask you to put your priority on top. What is the task that you would undertake in your first day on the job? would it be increasing the VAT rate, putting on a wealth tax on the top 1%, increasing the base and rate of corporate tax, reducing tax incentives, or increasing personal income tax? So I can see that, again, we have a lot of you participants who have joined in and are putting your votes into place there. And so at the moment, it looks like the reducing tax incentives and wealth tax are competing for second and third. But Gitte, is there anything here that surprises you after your comments and the presentation from Pak Prem and Ibu Inge?
I love, because we didn't touch on it very well, about reducing tax incentives for investors, because one thing, there are two competing interests. Indonesia needs foreign capital in order to develop infrastructure and to get its country ready for the next leap. And that makes it very difficult to move away from tax incentives. But what we know, and we know this in Capabuild because we often invite private sector sponsors to give their view on why they invest in a country. And never have we heard that tax incentives are the reason why. They come because there is a large consumer market, infrastructure is good, there's a good level of education, there are it's easy to do business, it could be proximity, it could be a particular specialization, but rarely do tax incentives matter. And when you combine tax incentives, particularly in mining, I know in Indonesia it's quite popular. So a nickel mine, an Australian company getting incredible incentives. When you do that and you combine that with increasing a VAT rate, people go, what's going on? You know, we have here rich companies taking minerals out of our land, and what's the end result? It will never get it back. And we pay more VAT. So it is very important. And that's why tax is not an island. We often train with different departments and we let private industry explain what really matters to them. And it's like a bonus. They often say, yeah, it's a bonus if we get a tax incentive. It's not that important. I think a wealth tax is surprising because we didn't talk about it either, but I love it. It's back on the agenda in many countries, and even the IMF, which is not always the most progressive organization and often has advocated for go for VAT, says now we need a wealth tax, which is great progress. And we also need to be mindful that we have in the background, and this will be on the mind of any Minister of Finance, the OECD Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. What if the corporate tax rate drops to 15%? What do we do then? So you try to cover yourself for different scenarios. And that's why some countries say, well, we're not going to increase the corporate tax rate because if this comes off in Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, then we need to deal with that and we need to find alternatives. The reality is that it's highly unlikely that Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 will come through anytime soon. India said last week, well, we only participate if they both are approved. It's highly unlikely the US and other countries in the OECD will approve Pillar 1. They hope the rest of the world goes for Pillar 2 and reduces the corporate tax rates, but let the US get away with Pillar 1 not accepting it, is my personal view. Let me be very clear. So I think Indonesia has been incredibly smart by already preparing a digital services tax. Many countries are doing that. If Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are not coming through, a digital services tax can be expanded. I think Indonesia is doing a marvelous job with including it in VAT and with crypto assets being part in VAT. And I think they prepare well with digital services tax. And I understand the difficulties. You have to be diplomatic. They're part of the G20. I don't want to be a Minister of Finance in Indonesia. I have utmost admiration for Sri Mulyani taking on this job for a long time. It's a hard diplomatic call because the global south is not served by Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. It's highly unlikely to happen, but we need to prepare for all futures. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much, Gitte. And the final question is just some perspectives on the presentation, which will be great for us to analyse later. So over to you, Gitte, if you'd like to wrap up.
I want to thank everyone, and I so look forward to the next presentation and the discussion. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Prem. Thank you, PKN STAN. Over to you.
Thank you, Bu Gitte, Gary, and Pak Prem for the great presentation. To sum it up, I think we saw how different countries in the world implement VAT in their respective countries. There's no one plan fits all. It depends on the country. And we just saw that Bu Gitte shows us, well, although VAT is a major source of revenue, there must be steps in implementing it to reduce the negative side effects. And also for Gary, thank you for those great polls and perspective we got from the audiences. Thank you. Now, before we get into our discussion with the audience, there is actually one more person we need to invite. That is the Director of Tax Education, Service and Public Relation, Mr. Neilmaldrin Noor. Before we invite him, I think through a video, let me just introduce Pak Neilmaldrin Noor to our audience. Could you bring up that? So Pak Neilmaldrin Noor is currently the Director of Tax Dissemination, Service and Public Relation. He gained his Master of Science in Policy Economics at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His work experience varies from being head of vast differences of regional tax offices from Nusa Tenggara, Sulawesi Selatan, Barat, dan Tenggara, Jawa Timur, and Jawa Barat. A professional qualification, he's a certified change professional and certified professional and change management. He gained a Best Regional Tax Office at the Ministry of Finance in 2018, Satya Lencana Karya Satya 20 from the President of the Republic of Indonesia in 2015, and Best Tax Office at Jakarta Khusus Regional Tax Office in 2014. Also, okay. Now we will present a video from Mr. Neilmaldrin Noor. I think it's a video. I'm not sure whether he is present right now. Can we organize a confirm this?
Not with us, Putra. He has another agenda.
All right, Inge. Yes, so we will be playing a video from Mr. Neilmaldrin Noor himself. The sound, I think, is not on.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, and best regard for us all. First of all, the Honorable Head of the Financial Education and Training Agency, Ministry of Finance, Bapak Andin Hadiyanto, and our distinguished speakers, Ibu Gitte Heij and Bapak Premkumar Baldewsing from Capabuild, and also the participants we are proud of. Let us praise Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the Almighty, for granting us His grace, so we are able to attend the National Tax Webinar today with the theme of Tax Increment, how it benefits economic development. On behalf of the Director General of Taxes, Mr. Suryo Utomo, I'd like to thank you for entrusting us the opportunity to deliver a keynote speech at this very important event. We apologize for the unfortunate situation that Mr. Suryo Utomo cannot deliver his speech on this occasion, as there is must attend event that cannot be represented. On his behalf, as the Director of Tax Consulting Services and Public Relations, please allow me to deliver his speech. We in the Directorate General of Taxes, or DGT, had recently celebrated the National Tax Day, which was held on July 14th, as this year main theme, Spirit in Togetherness Recover the Economy. The celebration serves as a reminder for us to keep up our spirit of fellowship in our journey to establish a solid taxation system through tax reform. As long and continuous journey, tax reform is a process that is continuously implemented to adjust our taxation system with the current economic situation and technology developments. With a solid taxation system, we hope that it can strengthen our national state budget, or APBN, in order to create a fair and prosperous national life. Before continuing, please allow me to remind all of the participants about the history of our national tax reform. The tax reform began in 1983 as a mark by changing the fundamental of our taxation system from official assessment into self-assessment. This change is our elders' first step to create a solid taxation system by relying on trust between the GT and taxpayers. On the next period of 1990 to 2000, the GT been through reform of tax law by establishing the taxation principles and simplified type of taxes. On 2016, of technology development, the GT had been modernizing and restructuring its institution by creating DGT also initiated the digitalization of services by the using 2016 and 2017 with the law number 11 of 2016 had been approved by the government. DGT implemented the tax amnesty program to create a solid taxpayer database and encourage asset repatriation. By 2018, and responding to the informal era, DGT implemented the tax amnesty program to create a solid taxpayer database and encourage asset repatriation. By 2018, and responding to the informal era, DGT had new strategic in tax reform program which were referred as PSAP. PSAP, or Tax Administration System Update, is made up to focusing the tax reform in 5 pillars that are organization, human resource, information technology, business process, and regulation. As the pillar of organization and human resources, DGT had been successful in reorganizing its institution by establishing 18 new middle tax office, or KPP Madya, and improving the duties and functions of primary tax offices, or KPP Pratama. DGT also introducing a new pattern of supervision based on strategy and territory taxpayers. To improve the quality of its human resource, DGT had initiated the functionalization of its employees with specific field of skill. As the pillars of information technology and database, SEDJP, which is currently DGT's main information system, is improved further so that it can be used concurrently with the implementation of the new core tax administration system, or PSEAP, to a singular system. as we are determined to complete this entire process of integration by October 2023. The entire new core tax system will be launched on 1st January on 2024. As the pillars of regulation, the Gitte had been participating in the drafting of the National Economic Recovery Law, Undang-Undang PEN, the Job Creation Law, Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja, Stamp Duty Law, or Undang-Undang Bea Materai, and the Harmonization of Tax Regulation Law, atau Undang-Undang APP, which recently made significant change to taxation system. The harmonization of the tax regulation law is an important component of the tax reform that will lay the groundwork of taxation system as a healthy, fair, effective, and accountable system as a medium and long-term solution. This law modifies and improves the provision of the tax procedures law, or Undang-Undang KUP, income tax law, Undang-Undang PPH, VAT law, or Undang-Undang PPN, and implementation of voluntary disclosure program, or PPS. As a mandate of harmonization of tax regulation law, the adjustment of value-added tax rate from 10% to 11% had been implemented since 1st April 2022. This rate adjustment is required to broaden the taxation base while adjusting the policy of income tax, which are widen the lowest risk bracket of individual taxpayer from 0 to 50 million into 0 to 60 million by 5%, while adding a new highest rate bracket above 5 trillion rupiah by 35%, and applying the non-taxable income limit for the individual taxpayer businessman up to 500 million rupiah gross a year. This policy are carried out while keeping the public interest with the goal of reflecting justice for the difference of income level. It is reflecting the principle of gotong royong, in which those who can pay more help those who cannot, so that low to middle income business, or UMKM, can continue to receive incentive and high income businesses can contribute more. By the near future, we hope that by continuing the progress of tax reform, our taxation system will have a broadened tax base and the tax ratio will be increased, so that it can be strengthened our national state budget, or APBN, in order to create a fair and prosperous national life. For the closing, I'd like to state that the reform as an improvement process in DGT will never stop, because reform will always exist in every changing era. As the result, we are constantly seeking support from every stakeholder and public to continue our work in order to support the nation and create fair and prosperous nation life for all of our citizens. May Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala make it all smooth for us, a nation in which we take pride. Amin. Salam satu bahu, pajak kita untuk kita. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Direktur General of Taxes, Suryo Utomo.
Yep. So we've heard the remarks from the director of Humas, as we call it, delivering a speech from the Director General of Taxes himself, Suryo Utomo, who unfortunately cannot be with us here today to meet us live. Moving forward, we will now enter the third session of our discussion, which is a Q&A from the audience to our panelists or our speakers, Bu Inge, Bu Gitte, and Mr. Prem. I would like to welcome anyone from the audience that would like to ask a question about the topic of today on VAT tax rate increase. Also from the materials that all our speakers have presented. If there are any questions, just use the raise hand feature on the Zoom, or you can submit your question through the link on PRPN or tax fair account. Is there any question? Are there any questions? So maybe we're still waiting for questions from the audience. I would like to. Oh no, we have our first question. Raise hand from BPPK Kepri. Well, it's quite far. Kepulauan Riau. Fahriani. Mrs. Fahriani,
Yes.
the floor is yours. You may ask your question, please.
Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to ask two questions. First question is to Mrs. Inge, Diana Rismawanti. As we know that Indonesia is Muslim majority, so why don't we optimal our tax in potential in Sharia tax? And secondly is to Miss Gitte. It's I agree about the VAT, but in some case like UMKM, to the strategy to improve and increase marketing of UMKM, usaha mikro kecil menengah, they don't have to chat about VAT. So how about your opinion about this? Thank you, and thanks for the answer.
Thank you, Mrs. Fahriani. The first question is on Sharia tax. If I am correct me if I'm wrong, it's to Bu Inge. Bu Inge, you can please answer the question from Mrs. Fahriani.
Well, thank you, Putra, and thank you, Ibu Fahriani. Wow, the question. Maybe Bu Gitte and Pak Prem also can have some comment on this one. Well, Syariah tax. I haven't really learned about Syariah tax, to be honest. We are, most of Indonesian are Muslim, Ibu Gitte and Pak Prem, but I know, yeah, I had once an experience to be in the middle of the member of Majlis Ulama Indonesia, which is it is quite hard for me because they're talking about the Muslim law, Islamic law, instead of tax, which is like it is a country law, or how do you call it? Well, I'm not sure to answer this one actually, to be honest, Ibu Fahriani, I'm so sorry for this. But in my opinion, as a country, I mean, I know most of us Muslim, but this group of people, which is majority Indonesia, is always to be considered, I think, yeah, with the government, how we can implement tax or whatever the type of tax is. But I'm very sure that the religion things or the religion thing must be one of the consideration in implementing any kind of laws. I think that's for in general. I think I'm not really talking about Sharia tax, but I think that's what my answer for this moment. Thank you, Putra.
Thank you. I know it's a question for Bu Inge, but Bu Gitte and Mr. Prem, if you would like to add to that or give an opinion, you're welcome. Bu Gitte?
Yeah, first of all, to make sure, would you repeat the question? Both
yes.
To Ibu Inge and to me, because the sound was a bit off. I want to make sure.
All right. Yeah, the sound to me was also very quiet, but if I'm not wrong, correct me, Bu Fahriani. She asked if whether or not Indonesia can implement a type of Sharia tax, or something in that tone.
That is a fantastic question, and it's a subject of lots of debate because many countries are looking at the future and thinking, how can we fund? Well, financing for development is the theme, and where can we get funding from? And we work very closely with the Committee of Fiscal Studies at the University of Nairobi And one of the people we work with is the current chair, and her name is Leila Latif. And she has written extensively about the possibilities of zakat being used for public
Recording in
health.
progress.
And
Recording
her work
stopped.
is very informative because it is on that edge of a text needs to be, it has this definition, it needs to be good for the public, it needs to be fair and equitable, and it needs to make no distinction. And would a zakat or a Sharia tax actually then only apply to people from a particular religion? And she's done amazing work, and we see a shift. And we see this in Indonesia over the last 20 years as well, with Islamic bonds being issued to be more inclusive of the different possibilities that you see to generate domestic revenue. And so there may be scope there if it can be interpreted in such a way that it could be used for certain parts of public expenditures. And her work, I put her name in the, or ask Gary to put her name in the chat. People can look her up. Most of her work is freely available, and she has really done so much work in this area that I think is very worthwhile looking at for a country like Indonesia. And the second question, I didn't get either, and I'm so sorry, it's the sound. Would you repeat it, Mas Putra?
Yes, Bu Gitte. I think Bu Faryani asks along the line of small and medium enterprises, the taxes for small and medium enterprises. It's quite hard to tax the UMKM in Indonesia. What with first of all the shadow economy and everything. How could we improve that? And through the VAT, how could the UMKM or the small and medium enterprises contribute to that? Bu Faryani, if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Yes, I think the UMKM they should not charge about the VAT because it's influence the price of their product. So if we talk about VAT for the some case, especially for the UMKM, they don't have to charge VAT. This is the reason why, because we want to improve the strategy and increase their sales.
Okay. Can you get that, Bu Gitte?
I think I did. So what we see in Indonesia is that the threshold was quite high to exempt small and medium-sized enterprises. I understand that now they can register voluntarily if they want to, but I think most would opt not to do that. And that means they are outside the system. The question is, how much would you generate from them if they were inside the system? And Prem and I were discussing a case, and it was part of Swaziland. Prem, am I right? Can you nod or not? Was it? It was an interesting study where they forced all enterprises, no threshold, nothing, to register via online mechanism their business and start to collect VAT. And the question was, do you then raise more revenue? And the expectation was yes, because then we have everyone in our tax net and it works. And the surprising result of that study was that it led to lots of companies registering, but it did not lead to any increase in revenue, because small and medium-sized enterprises start to offset the tax credits they had against what they had to pay in VAT, and the value added was relatively small. So it's very important to closely look at that, the cost of compliance for small, medium-sized businesses, and then to say, okay, the informal economy is a big issue. It really is, and I fully understand that. And I worked for a long time in Indonesia, and I know the struggles. It's hard, and there is no one solution. And foreigners can come in and come with wonderful ideas. They have no idea what it's like to be on the ground. When you're on the ground, it's a struggle. It will take time. It will get better with time because technology improves, cross-referencing improves, all those things matter. But how much can you generate from that group of small entrepreneurs remains doubtful. I would love to see more studies done on it. Because where is that compliance gap? So we see it's roughly 40% that you can improve. No one gets to 100. I think Finland is like 97% or something, but that's about it, and that's all digitalized. And it's wonderful if someone from Finland comes to your country and says, wow, it's easy, this is how you do it. It's not. It is easy in Finland, but it's not easy for you. The question is, how much extra effort do you have to make, and will it generate enough revenue to justify it? I hope this answers your question. Not sure.
Thank you, Ms. Gitte and Ms. Inge.
All right, thank you, Bu Fahriani. Okay, we're going to go to the next question. There is a raised hand from Ray, Mr. Ray, I presume. Please ask your question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I would like to ask some questions to the panelists. As you can see, the increase in VAT tariffs will significantly impact goods and services prices, and undoubtedly will cause a reduction in purchasing power in society. And this may block the ongoing economic recovery and also act as a negative catalyst for Indonesia's economic recovery. How can the Indonesian government assure that the increasing of the tariffs wouldn't harm the ongoing economic recovery? And what measures have the Indonesian government taken to tackle the issue? Thank you.
Should I go first?
All right.
Okay.
Yes. You may go first, Bu Inge.
But I think Bu Gitte and Pak Prem will also add some more for the answer to this question. I think the raised question is almost the same with the one in the chat from someone there. Yeah.
Yes.
Why government increased the rate right now during the pandemic? The things that I need to clarify for all of you, the audience, that when the government increased the tax rate, it has been done by so many research. Please be sure that we not just increase the rate because we need more money. That it doesn't happen like that. We have done so many research, doing so many things to make sure that this will not affect badly to all the community in the country. Well, it is true that probably the higher rate of VAT will influence the inflation rate or the person purchasing power and everything like that. But Indonesia, when this has also been discussed before the undang-undang harmonization tax law been implemented, that the study said, the research said that the inflation rate in Indonesia will affect, but then the result of the higher VAT rate is actually will cover the inflation rate, or it's mean that the positive impact of the increase in VAT rate is actually much higher than the negative impact of the inflation. That's the simple way to say it. And the other thing is that actually the Indonesian government through the economic recovery program, we know that you know that we have so many incentive for people, the poors or the SMEs and everything. That's all facilities is actually to help the Indonesian not go down too deep with their purchasing power. For example, also the income tax for salary. Remember that one? We have the salary tax borne by the government. It means that every salary accepted by any worker, they don't the the perusahaan, the one who gave them the work, the one who paid the salary doesn't have to cut the salary by tax. They have to give it back to the employee. The employer cannot cut the tax from the salary because it means that the government will help all those who has the salary to have the more purchasing power in the economy. I think that's one of the example, the easy example to see. Bu Gitte probably or Pak Prem, please. Oh, back to Putra then.
Yeah. Thank you, Inge. Pak Prem, would you like to add to that?
Yes, if I may comment very shortly. So the question is, if you have an increase in your VAT, then also the prices of goods and services will increase, which is logic, because I have to pay 1% extra instead of 10% previously. And that will reduce my purchasing power, and that can have a negative impact on the economy. What I see in countries, in European countries, for instance, the Netherlands is an example, is that the government works with two rates. So you have a high rate of, what is it, 21% at this moment, and you have a low rate of 9%. In the past, it was 6 and 19. And the basic goods like bread and other primary goods which people need to stay alive were subject to the lower rate instead of the higher rate. So only the luxury goods, you can call it luxury goods, were subject to the higher rate. Perhaps that's an avenue which Indonesia can explore. On the other hand, if you work with two rates, then also the compliance burden increases, both for companies, but also for the government. So again, this is the balancing act, and I think Gitte can talk a bit more on that.
Yeah, Bu Gitte.
Is indeed a concern that inflation goes up when you increase VAT. The reality is that is often less than expected, particularly if it's such a small increase. It's 1%. It's not. I recall in the 1990s, I was
we cannot understand it.
Okay.
Okay, that's better. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to repeat it.
Right. In general, and this is the Australian, this is when you don't have a VAT for a long time in Australia and you don't invest in infrastructure. Our internet is very bad in Australia. So I'm juggling between different providers because the government has not invested in infrastructure. But it has a set of a GST, VAT, but has not invested it wisely, I think. And now we have the problems. So apologies. Inflation is a concern, but if you raise it by 1%, it is actually quite a modest concern. And I advised the government of Vietnam when they introduced the VAT in the 1990s, and they were very interested in the example of Indonesia, and they kept coming back. But if we introduce it, we get a disaster because we get high inflation. What happened in Indonesia? And I said, well, actually, it went quite smoothly when it was first introduced in the 1980s. It doesn't have to be that way. But we must make a distinction, I think, in all our discussions between using tax as a tool to discourage certain behaviors like drinking, smoking, or using it as a tool to redistribute to poorer people or to certain sectors, versus using tax as a source of revenue for government. And then we look at what do governments do with it? Because if you spend it well, I would not have had to repeat my answer because the internet would have been great. And that's a wonderful example of how not to spend money or how you could change that. So it has many aspects. Inflation is not so much of a concern with a 1% increase. In most other countries, like Prem gave the example, indeed, you want to keep it simple. And pressure groups don't want to keep it simple. They want different rates, they want exemptions, they want all these things. So politically, it's very difficult to get it through. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Gitte. The previous question is actually very, very similar with the one asked in the chat box. So I'm sorry to Mr. Gunawan. I think the majority of what you asked has been answered. So I'm not gonna fall back into that. I'm reminding everyone that the question could be asked in Indonesian. There is a translator available, so don't hesitate to ask any question. And also, the organizers have informed me that there are prizes for interesting questions being asked. So waiting for questions from other audiences. Maybe I could ask a question for our speakers, if I may. First of all, maybe to Mr. Prem. I know you've in your presentation you said that the tax structures varies by country. Do you see any pattern whether these types of country requires or maybe needs these type of tax structures, or maybe other types of country? Do you see any pattern in those?
There is definitely a pattern you can see if you look at all these economic diagrams made up by economic people at the OECD, for instance. Also, the Asian Development Bank makes these diagrams, statistics, and the pattern with regard to your question is that we see two important taxes which catch your mind, catch your attention, and those are the indirect taxes and the corporate income tax. Those are the two taxes which compete for the first place. And what I've seen, I've explained in one of my slides that in Indonesia, the indirect taxes are on the first place, and then second place, corporate income tax. And the same pattern I see also in other countries. Sometimes you see that personal income tax, revenue from personal income tax is higher than corporate income tax, because the trend is that the corporate income tax has decreased over the years. It comes from almost 50% to around 20% these days, and it is compensated by higher income taxes, personal income taxes. So in some countries, you see indirect taxes on the first place, very important, around 1/3 of the total tax revenue is from indirect taxes. And then you see either corporate income tax or personal income tax competing for the second place. Can I add perhaps something on the question about Sharia tax?
Sure.
As a former tax advisor, and that's a long time ago, I know that a lot of money came from investors who wanted to invest in a structure which is Sharia compliant. And you know, if there is a project, a big project, and you need money, and you need a lot of money, and there are investors with this requirement, then you make sure as tax advisor or legal advisor or accountants or a combination that you have a structure in place. And a lot of money was earned by people who specialized in Sharia compliant financing. And what I remember from as a former tax advisor is that Malaysia was on top of the list with knowledge about Sharia compliant structures. And again, you need, as a project, if you have a big, huge real estate project and you have parties from, let's say, Saudi Arabia who want to spend hundreds of millions and they come with this requirement, you have to listen to them because otherwise you don't have all the funding you need and you make sure that the structure meets all these requirements. So that's something what I've seen in the private sector. What I haven't seen up till now, apart from countries like Saudi Arabia, but in most of the countries, you have this division between government and religion. There is a special word for it, but I don't know the word in English. And I haven't seen up till now that a country is conversing its current non-religious system, legal system, and tax system into a Sharia compliant system. Because otherwise, you have a lot of other religions like Hinduism and Christianity, etc., who will also go to the government. Yeah, you have now new rules for specifically for Sharia religion. You also have to take account of our religion. So it's I don't think it's doable in general. That's what I wanted to comment on that question. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Mr. Prema. Interesting comment there about Sharia tax. We now go to our next question. This one comes from a question that's submitted through the website, our website, from Kiki, Mrs. Kiki. She asks that, well, although there is a big administrative cost of VAT in Indonesia, how do you do the cost and benefit analysis to, for example, going forward, Indonesia will want to put VAT in a higher mix than other tax schemes. This question can be answered by any three of our speakers, Bu Inge, Bu Gitte, or Pak Prem. So yeah, if anyone would like to answer first.
Gitte, please, Bu Gitte. I haven't really get the question actually, Putra. Sorry.
All right. So let me rephrase that. So according to Makiki, there is a high administrative cost to VAT. So for Indonesia to embrace VAT as maybe the top tax source, what would the government have to do? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Pram.
In my presentation, I understand the question. If you have VAT and you either introduce VAT or you increase the existing rate, VAT rates, it goes hand in hand with increased compliance, increased administrative burden, both at the level of taxpayers and businesses, because they are the collectors of VAT. The only thing we private persons get when we buy a good or a service, we only get the invoice and VAT is mentioned there. We don't pay the VAT directly as private persons to the government. So it's the businesses, the suppliers of the goods and services who are appointed in the law as VAT collectors. So again, back if you introduce a VAT or you increase a VAT rate, it goes hand in hand with increasing administrative costs, both at the level of the VAT collectors and at the level of the government, because they have to audit, whether things are going well, whether parties are compliant. And I gave you an example, and perhaps it's not one-on-one applicable to Indonesia, but I gave you the example of a huge market like the European Union, where they changed the system recently for digital goods, where e-commerce platforms and multinationals can make use of this one-stop shop. So instead of registering and paying the VAT to the different countries in the EU where they are active, they have a one-stop shop in one country, one EU member state, and there they pay the VAT to the country of their choice, and that country in its turn distributes the VAT to the countries where the ultimate consumers are located. It's an example of how you can minimize administrative cost for both governments and especially also for VAT collectors. For Indonesia, I don't have the answer yet how you can do that, but perhaps Bu Inge has some ideas about reducing the administrative costs.
Well, I guess that kind of issue will only happen in the earlier stage of the increasing tax rate. Yeah, I think. Yeah, because of course, with the increasing tax rate, we have to change so many things. Actually, the things like the application, the system. We have to adjust all those kind of things. Will uh, in the point of the cost that will become the burden for tax administration and also for the taxpayer. But I think compared to what we're gonna have from this increase of tax rate, then it will be like it's not really a balancing, but in some point it will be much of the benefit uh, compared to the cost. Maybe that's the simple things to do it. Yeah. Gitte?
A few things. I want to go back to the Sharia law because I talk about zakat, and I understand, not mistaken, that zakat is already collected by the Indonesian government on behalf of those who adhere to the Muslim faith. Not sure if that's correct, but this is to nuance Prem's view, because I think what we will see towards the future is more creative thinking by local, regional, and central governments on how to generate revenue, and you need to be creative. And Prem is right, Malaysia is really a front runner in this area, and I also remember with the Islamic bonds that Indonesia had a lot of advice from Malaysia. Coming back to this issue of compliance costs, so it's not an actual tax. We have difference between cost of compliance and the cost of the actual tax. I think it will take time. I think if you can merge the different sides of tax, because once you know someone's VAT business, you also know something about their corporate tax situation, you know something about the wages tax they withhold from their employees. Imagine that you could integrate that. And I'm not saying that that's easy, you know, that's a perspective if you have lots of access to technology, your electricity, your internet works well. But imagine you could do that, and your cost of compliance will go down from both taxpayers' position as well as from a government perspective. And I really see that that's very feasible in Indonesia in the not too distant future.
Thank you.
I see that there is someone with his hand up for a long time.
Yes, yes, begitu. Mas Ajli. Yeah. Please, you may ask your question.
Right. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you can hear my voice clearly. As we can see from the last survey that you held about the priority to increase the state revenue, most participants put the wealth tax as their priority. That means most of us agree about the wealth tax. So what's holding the government on implementing the wealth tax itself? Well, we know that Indonesian government put additional layer to the personal income tax through the tax regulation harmonization law. That is the 35% rate for those whose income is above 5 billion. If I'm not mistaken, above 5 billion, yeah. Is it counted as the wealth tax, or if not, can you give more description or a bit description about the wealth tax itself? Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any specific speaker you want to direct your question, Mas Aji, or any?
No. Any speakers may answer my question. Thank you.
All right. So about wealth tax, I think the survey was about the 1% of the wealthy, but maybe Mr. Aji is asking about how do we tax wealth. It's quite there's a quite difference, but okay, we'll go with the wealth tax on wealth. Maybe Bu Inge first, from a representative from the government. Are we even considering tax on wealth?
Okay, thank you for the question, Aji. I tried to memorize. I think Indonesia, I'm not sure about in the past, but not in the current situation. I'm not sure. So whether when we I would like to ask for Ibu Gitte and Pak Prem, when a country doing like something like tax amnesty, so because we have to pay tax for the asset that we haven't declared in our report, is that, can we call it a wealth tax, even if it's just for the temporary things? But in Indonesia, we don't have any wealth tax at the moment, because we implement the personal income tax and corporate income tax. So it's based on the income, not based on the asset or wealth of the taxpayer. But I'm not so sure about tax amnesty. Bu Gitte and Pak Prem probably can have a comment on that one.
Thank you, Binga. Pak Prem?
Yes, what I understand from this voluntary disclosure rules is that if you have hidden your wealth and your income offshore, then the Indonesian government offers you a possibility to report that income or underlying assets to the Indonesian tax authorities against a nice rate without fines Like unlike other countries where you have fines of 100%, 200, some even 300% of the wealth you have hidden offshore. Indonesia doesn't have that. It only offers, I think, a reduced rate. And it also requires that when you have reported your hidden wealth, previously hidden wealth, you have to invest it in certain assets which are advantageous for increasing the economic situation in Indonesia, like in certain bonds. But back to the question, do we have examples of net wealth tax? Yes, we have that. In my country, for instance, Holland, again, when I was a tax advisor, I filed hundreds and hundreds of tax returns for rich people, ultra rich people. And at that time, we had this wealth tax at the rate of, I think, 1% or even lower. I don't remember anymore, but it's easy. You have to mention all your assets and your liabilities. And if the outcome of your assets minus your liabilities is a plus, then you have to pay a certain percentage as wealth tax. At a certain moment, the Netherlands abolished that wealth tax and replaced it with a box system. And box 3, there you have to report your assets and your liabilities, and you are taxed on a fictitious amount against a fixed rate. So that's also a form of wealth tax. So you have different forms of taxing the wealthy people with a lot of wealth. And I don't see why Indonesia cannot do that. Gitte has the answer.
No, there is no such thing as one answer. Let's be clear. I love what Pak Noor mentioned about nothing stays the same. So why is there now more support for a wealth tax than maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago? The reason is that what we see is if you work, you actually accumulate less money than if you have investment in property or in shares, or imagine you had investments, you had shares in Amazon or Netflix, and you do not work, you will get rich a lot quicker than when you work like we all do. And that is a trend that is growing. We see that people, the 1% is during the COVID crisis has increased its wealth incredibly, by incredible percentages. And they're not captured by income tax, by personal income tax. And we see growing inequality within countries, between regions in countries, between people, and between countries worldwide. And if we want to address that, in the past we thought personal income tax is the way to do that. And now we know, no, it's not. And that is a very sad indictment of where we are heading as a world of citizens, where we actually see a growing gap between rich and poor. How you implement that politically, it's very difficult, because you always have a group who doesn't want it, and they may hold the balance of power in parliament, or they may then not vote for anything. In Australia, where I live, farmers don't want a wealth tax or an inheritance tax, which is not an option, because they want to give the farm to their children, and they hold the balance of power often in parliament, so it's not happening. It's not as easy to implement as we would like it, because you want to implement it without people then parking all their money in Singapore or moving to Mauritius to live, or to a tax haven. You see this with lots of people who have lots of money. So you need to come up with a way that works. And often, in that sense, real estate, you can't move real estate easily. So that can be, property tax can be used in some ways. But I believe with growing inequality, there will come a time that most people want a wealth tax, because income tax, personal income tax with very high progressive rates, is not going to make societies fairer. And there is a growing group of people who miss out, who are going to say, this is not fair, we need to address that, and they put pressure on governments.
Yeah, and you see that trend also in the USA. You have a number of billionaires there, ultra rich people, who are saying to the government, please tax me. I'm a billionaire and my effective tax rate on my income and wealth is as high as, sorry? Is as high as the effective tax rate of my secretary. So they also feel that they have to pay more taxes, but the rules at this moment are as such that they can make use of exemptions. For instance, when they make a capital gain, or they can defer taxation on their wealth. And what I understand is that under the Biden administration, they are also looking at ways to tax wealth of their taxpayers. So it's a growing trend, because one of the reasons is that, as we have stressed a number of times, is that corporate income tax is going down and down and down. I think it will end up around 15% if Pillar 2 goes through. We assume that you know about Pillar 2, but that's minimum tax, global minimum tax, if that goes through. But it will not increase anymore to what it was in the past, like 30, 40, sometimes 50%. So the revenue has to come from other sources, and therefore indirect taxes. You will also see environmental taxes, because that's also an important thing to look at, and also wealth taxes. So I see it as a trend.
Thank you, Mr. Prem. So times are changing, and we don't know what's in store for the future. We have time for one last question. This one is from Mr. Gilbert. He said that JP Morgan argued that in the near future there will be a recession. First of all, I know this might not be in your area of expertise, but do you agree with that, that the recession is looming? And the second question is, will the VAT be highly impacted by that recession? We go first maybe to Gitte.
Okay, I think you can't say worldwide a recession is happening. And I'm an international tax lawyer, and I'm a futurist. And as a futurist, you look very long term. So you don't look at the recession 1-2 years out. You know, what happened in Ukraine is affecting food prices, affecting oil prices, and that pushes prices up. I am not an economist. I can't comment on that. What I do see is that there is a reluctance by countries that in the past were the most powerful in the world to accept that it is shifting. So many OECD countries find it hard to accept that countries like China, Indonesia, India, Nigeria are really growing economies. Okay, there may be a small setback, but you have a young population, you have a very enthusiastic population, and these things matter greatly in weathering any recession or growing in the long term. And it is for many who have power very hard to let it go. So they cling on to power and come with, most of the time, dreams about the future. And the truth is, if you have a large population and you're growing, you're very well placed for the future. And the future is not in Europe, where the population is shrinking rapidly. It is in Asia and certain parts of Africa, where most labor will come from, where most innovative ideas will come from when you have young populations, lots of people working rather than being retirement, you have incredible potential. And whether or not there is a short-term recession, in the long term, I have very high hopes based on long-term projections for the Asian region. And the VAT may be slightly impacted by that right now, not an awful lot, a little bit, but in the long term, as long as you go with the times, particularly in this digital environment, and keep being a step ahead, as Prem said, he has in the past in his tax advisory work helped people who were a step ahead because they had a Prem. But now we have an Ibu Inge and we have a Pak Prem who are thinking with Indonesia how he can be a step ahead. And I think as long as you're flexible and thinking that way, and I think Indonesia does that in wonderful ways, particularly with the VAT and the digital economy, I think you're very well placed in the long term to weather any recession.
Yes, I agree with this positive note, Gitte. Recently I listened to a podcast about the situation right now in China. It's one of the important countries in your region. And because of these COVID lockdowns, which are still there, you see that it has a huge negative impact on the economy. And a consequence of that negative impact is that young people who just came out of the universities, they cannot find jobs. In a country like China, it was unbelievable that that's the effect. But also the economic growth rate in China has dropped significantly this year because of these COVID problems. And don't forget that the global supply chain is disturbed by COVID. Countries are onshoring or nearshoring activities, manufacturing activities, which previously were offshore to China. China was the manufacturer of the world. And now they don't want to be dependent on China anymore if another pandemic hits the world. So you see that also a lot of expats are coming back. They are leaving this country. So China at this moment, you have to watch that, and it has an influence. And I see it also as an opportunity for Indonesia. So that links it with the positive note of Gitte. Thanks.
Thank you. Lastly, Bu Inge, do you want to add to the discussion?
Well, Putra, that was a very good answer and point of view from Bu Gitte and Pak Prem. Let's stay there. Don't ruin it.
Okay.
But for me, being Indonesia, which is predicted to be one of the growing economies in the region, it is relief. I mean, it's a good thing to hear. And for us as Indonesian, I think we just have to be aware of what's going to happen and get ready when something bad is really not as good as we expect. Something like that. Thank you, Putra.
Thank you. That's all. That concludes our discussion for today. However, before we leave this session, maybe one last remark from all our speakers, just short remarks. Thank you. We begin first with Mr. Prem. Last remarks.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. And also the questions were very challenging every now and then, because not really, at least in my comfort zone, but nevertheless, I like that. And I like to be surprised because we're not aware of these questions. So it keeps me sharp. And I want to thank Gitte and also Bu Inge for being members of this panel session. And you did a very well job, Pak Putra, to manage to sort of manage this panel session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prem. Bu Inge, last remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Putra. Pak Prem, the same to me. I didn't really expect this very good question, challenging. Yes, you're right. But we tried to get over it, and hopefully our audience feel satisfied with our answer. But and yeah, again, please, uh, we have to what they call in terms of taxes. There's so many things that we have to try to understand, to try to follow what's the trend, where the trend goes, because sometimes it's just so hard to be different from other people from other countries. So we have to look at the global trend, what happened in the world, but that's become let us be one of those countries who are aware of what happened of what the what happened in the global world. I think that's all from me, Putra. And thank you to PKN STAN and all the organizing committee. And it's very nice to meet you, Bu Gitte and Pak Prem, with this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gitte. Last but not least, Bu Gitte, your closing remarks.
Thank you, Mas Putra. I want to ask all the students, you are the future. You are going to shape this very exciting future of a very beautiful and prosperous and promising country. When you prepare yourself during your studies, always ask the question, who wrote this and what was their background that made them write it in a particular way. Read from many different sources and always question why. Why does this person push this particular viewpoint? And do not be afraid to be different, because it's not, there is one truth. There isn't. There are many different truths, and you want to find the truth and the best options for your country. And that is something that is so exciting. I have really incredible hopes for Indonesia, and they're not based on just hope. As a futurist, I do a lot of work on Indonesia, and I think you have every right to be proud, to be optimistic, and to think of a very prosperous leading country in the Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Gitte. If this was an offline event, we would ask to give a round of applause to all our speakers. However, because it's online, we'll just give a virtual clap to all our amazing and distinguished speaker. I am very, very excited and very, very honored to be in the presence of the three of you, Miss Bu Inge, Bu Gitte, and Pak Prem. That's all from me. I will give the floor back to the Masters of Ceremony. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much for our moderator today, Bapak Putra Aryatama, for leading the great webinar this session. It was really insightful for all of us. We would also like to pay our deepest respect to the speakers, Ibu Gitte Heij, Bapak Premkumar Baldewsing, and Ibu Inge Diana Rismawanti. I kindly inform to our honorable speakers that you may leave if there are any other schedule after this, but you are very welcome if you want to stay.
Okay, we would like to inform all the participants can refill the presence link they already given by the committee, and all the participants must take screenshot to claim the e-certificate.
Well, next, we will do a game session. And in this session, we will be using Bahasa Indonesia. So to all participants, you can follow the instruction of using interpretation feature in the Zoom chat that had already given by the committee.
Baik, untuk selanjutnya akan dipandu dengan menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Baik teman-teman, untuk saat ini akan dilangsungkan sesi game di mana nanti setiap peserta harus mengisi dan mengikuti rangkaian sesi games melalui quizzes dengan instruksi yang sudah diberikan oleh panitia.
Baik, untuk teman-teman peserta semuanya yang ingin bergabung dengan dapat mengunjungi website joinmyquiz.com, kemudian memasukkan kode 903742. Saya ulangi, 903742.
Baik, sembari menunggu peserta bergabung dalam kuisis hari ini, akan kami infokan bahwa kuisis hari ini akan berhadiah, jadi pastikan seluruh peserta mengisi dengan jawaban yang benar dan juga tepat untuk mendapatkan hadiah menarik yang telah disediakan oleh panitia.
Berikutnya, kami juga ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada sponsor kita pada acara webinar hari ini. Yang pertama ada dari PT PII, Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia.
Yang kedua adalah PT SMF, Sarana Multigria Finansial.
Dan yang terakhir ada PT SMI, Sarana Multi Infrastruktur.
Kami juga ucapkan terima kasih kepada media partner dari acara hari ini. Yang pertama dari Ortex, Integrated Tax Service, Technology and Training.
Berikutnya dari Majalah Pajak.
Kemudian yang ketiga dari Pekan Raya STAN.
Dan yang terakhir, Radio Blast PKN STAN.
Baik, untuk teman-teman kami berikan himbauan sekali lagi untuk dapat segera membuka joinmyquiz.com, kemudian mengisi kode 903742. Baik, kami informasikan untuk sesi games hari ini melalui kuisis akan diberikan 10 soal, di mana soal adalah pembahasan dari sesi webinar hari ini.
Berikutnya akan diambil 3 pemenang, dan untuk kalian yang menang, harus menyertakan multi screenshot yang akan diserahkan ke panitia untuk melakukan klaim hadiah.
Betul sekali, jadi pastikan teman-teman memberikan jawaban yang baik dan juga tepat agar dapat mendapatkan hadiah yang telah disediakan oleh panitia. Sekali lagi kami himbau untuk seluruh peserta agar dapat bergabung dalam kuisis hari ini dengan kode referral 903742. Baik, untuk link dari kuis hari ini, sesi games telah dipandu oleh panitia. Untuk linknya dapat segera diklik di kolom chat Zoom.
Kemudian teman-teman juga bisa memasukkan kode 903742 untuk bergabung pada room game kita. Sekali lagi 903742.
Baik, di sini sudah terlihat ada banyak sekali peserta yang tertarik untuk mengikuti sesi games hari ini. Jadi langsung saja, tanpa berlama-lama lagi akan segera kita mulai sesi games hari ini. Kita akan mulai dalam 3, 2, 1. Oke, dan di sini sudah tertera ya, Mahen, di layar. Ada beberapa peserta yang sudah menjawab dengan sangat cepat, dan perolehan skornya pun juga sangat tipis ya.
Benar sekali, Mika. Ini menunjukkan bahwa tadi para peserta ikut memperhatikan sesi webinar dengan seksama.
Betul sekali. Baik, untuk urutan dari peringkat pertama terus berganti ya, Mahen. Di sini mulai dari skor 2.290, sekarang berganti menjadi 3.600, Mahen.
Benar. Yang terlihat di layarku nih, Mika, ada dari Wu IM. Tadi ini ingin menyusul ya ke peringkat pertama. Kemudian ada dari Betty, dia tadi juga cukup sengit persaingannya.
Oke, luar biasa sekali antusias dari teman-teman peserta hari ini ya. Sekarang dari Betty memimpin dengan skor 5.370. Ayo teman-teman yang lain jangan mau kalah ya. Karena untuk games hari ini akan ada hadiah yang sudah disediakan oleh panitia. Jadi pastikan teman-teman memberikan jawaban yang terbaik ya. Kali itu juga benar.
Menempati pertama dengan
Baik, Mahen. Dan di sini ternyata Raya sudah tergeser dengan peringkat pertama Sipu 10.190 skornya.
Ternyata Sipu juga tergeser dengan Ian yang sekarang menempati peringkat pertama dengan 8 strike dengan skor 10.500.
Luar biasa sekali persaingan, tampak sangat sengit ya hari ini.
Benar sekali, Mika.
Baik, dan di sini sudah ada 81 pemain sudah selesai mengerjakan 10 butir soal yang disediakan. Dan di sini di peringkat pertama ada Ian dengan skor 10.500, namun skor ini masih bisa berganti ya Mahen, mengingat teman-teman sangat bersemangat dalam mengikuti sesi webinar hari ini.
Baik, karena sudah akan ditutup, kita akan menutup sesi game ini dalam 3, 2, 1.
Baik, dan di sini sudah terlihat di layar teman-teman bahwa di peringkat pertama ada Ian dengan skor 10.500, disusul dengan Sipu dengan skor 10.190, dan pastikan untuk teman-teman pemenang sudah melakukan screenshot agar dapat melakukan klaim hadiah kepada panitia. Sekali lagi, untuk pemenang diharapkan untuk dapat mengambil screenshot agar dapat mengklaim hadiah kepada panitia.
Setelah ini kami akan melanjutkan sesi webinar menggunakan bahasa Inggris.
Okay, we would like to inform all the participants kindly fill the presence link that already given by the committee. And all the participants must take screenshot to claim the e-certifikat.
And now we are at the end of our webinar. So we would like to ask all
Webinar kita, kami ingin meminta semua peserta untuk menyalakan kamera karena
So prepare yourself and give your best smiles. I will lead the photo session by counting 3, 2, and 1. So prepare yourself and give your best smiles. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Once again, 3, 2, 1. Okay, lastly, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
We would like to thank our sponsors today. First, PT PII Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia.
Second, PT SMF Sarana Multigria Finansial.
And lastly, PT SMI Sarana Multi Infrastruktur. And we would like to thank our media partners. First, Ortex Integrated Tax Service Technology and Training.
Second, Majalah Pajak.
Third, Ikan STAN.
And lastly, Radio Blast PKN STAN. And we have already shared the presence link on the screen. All participants must take a screenshot to claim the certificate and fill the presence link. The link will be open for 16 minutes from now. And I kindly ask all the participants to follow our lovely sponsors today at PT SMF Persero on Instagram. Once again, at PT SMF Persero on Instagram.
Okay, we have reached the end of our webinar. And once again, we would like to pay our deepest respect to speaker, Ibu Gitte Heij, Bapak Premkumar Baldewsing, and Ibu Inge Rismawanti. Also our moderator today, Bapak Putra Aryatama, and also the webinar participants either on Zoom or YouTube Live for the invaluable presence and also insightful discussions on the topic tax increment, how it benefits economic development.
Okay, that's all. Thank you so much for today. Stay safe and stay healthy. Good evening.
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi, Santi, Santi Om.
terbentang dari Sabang sampai Merauke. Dari Miangas hingga Rote, Indonesia merupakan negara kepulauan terbesar di dunia. Oleh karena itu, pemerataan pembangunan infrastruktur menjadi fokus penting guna penyediaan fasilitas sarana dan prasarana untuk menunjang kesejahteraan dan kemajuan masyarakat Indonesia. Dalam rangka penanganan dampak pandemi COVID-19 yang melanda, pemerintah melalui Program Pemulihan Ekonomi Nasional (PEN) melakukan berbagai langkah untuk mendorong pemulihan perekonomian. Salah satunya melalui percepatan pembangunan infrastruktur yang merata. PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia Persero sebagai salah satu Special Mission Vehicles Kementerian Keuangan berperan aktif mendorong percepatan pembangunan infrastruktur melalui mandatnya sebagai penyedia penjaminan pemerintah di bidang infrastruktur dengan skema kerjasama pemerintah dengan badan usaha atau KPBU maupun non-KPBU memberikan fasilitas penyiapan proyek serta memberikan penjaminan pemerintah untuk pelaku usaha korporasi dalam rangka pelaksanaan program PEN. Setelah 12 tahun berdiri, PT PII melaksanakan mandat yang diberikan dengan memberikan penjaminan sejumlah 39 proyek infrastruktur dengan total nilai investasi lebih dari 350 triliun rupiah. Terdapat 6 sektor infrastruktur yang telah diberikan penjaminan oleh PT PII, yaitu sektor jalan, air minum, ketenagalistrikan, transportasi, telekomunikasi, dan pariwisata. Melalui pelaksanaan mandatnya, PT PII hadir untuk mendorong percepatan pembangunan infrastruktur yang bermanfaat dalam peningkatan tenaga kerja, meningkatkan nilai tambah ekonomi, dan peningkatan kualitas kehidupan masyarakat. Melalui IIGF Institute, PT PII turut aktif dalam melaksanakan edukasi untuk pemahaman dan pengetahuan KPBU melalui capacity building di kalangan stakeholders, kementerian atau lembaga, dan pemerintah daerah. Serta telah menjalin kerjasama dengan 35 universitas nasional dalam pengembangan kapasitas sumber daya manusia dan kajian terkait KPBU dalam bendera University Network for Indonesia Infrastructure Development atau UNIID. Dalam hal penerapan tata kelola perusahaan yang baik, PT PII telah menerapkan 3 lines of defense, yaitu pengendalian risiko, pengawasan berbagai pihak, dan transparansi sebagai kunci utama dalam manajemen risiko bisnis dan perusahaan. PT PII juga telah menerima dukungan yang sangat baik dari para pemangku kepentingan, baik mitra bisnis dari pusat maupun daerah, yang selama ini berkomitmen dan berjuang bersama PT PII mengembangkan berbagai proyek infrastruktur. Dengan semangat sinergi, kolaborasi, dan inovasi, PT PII semakin kuat mewujudkan peran dan kontribusinya dalam mendukung pemerintah Republik Indonesia dalam mendorong, membangun, dan menjaga keberlanjutan pembangunan infrastruktur guna memberikan manfaat yang sebesar-besarnya bagi seluruh rakyat Indonesia untuk mewujudkan cita-cita Indonesia maju.
Memiliki rumah adalah impian dari jutaan keluarga di Indonesia. Namun, pemenuhan kebutuhan akan tempat tinggal yang layak dan terjangkau masih menjadi permasalahan tersendiri. Untuk itulah, PT Sarana Multigria Finansial Persero atau SMF hadir. Sebagai perusahaan pembiayaan sekunder perumahan yang merupakan BUMN di bawah Kementerian Keuangan, SMF berperan sebagai fiscal tools pemerintah untuk menghadirkan rumah yang layak dan terjangkau bagi setiap keluarga di Indonesia. SMF memfasilitasi aliran dana jangka panjang menengah atau panjang dari pasar modal ke sektor perumahan melalui lembaga penyalur pembiayaan perumahan seperti bank, bank syariah, bank pembangunan daerah, dan multifinance untuk mendorong kepemilikan rumah yang layak dan terjangkau bagi setiap keluarga di Indonesia. Usaha kami dalam mendorong kepemilikan rumah yang layak dan terjangkau bagi masyarakat dilakukan dengan kegiatan usaha utama dan pendukung yang terdiri dari sekuritisasi, memfasilitasi transaksi sekuritisasi dengan cara membeli tagihan pembiayaan perumahan lalu ditransformasi menjadi efek beragun aset atau EBA yang dapat dijual di pasar modal. Penyaluran pinjaman, pembiayaan untuk lembaga penyalur pembiayaan perumahan sehingga mereka bisa memiliki dana untuk penyaluran pembiayaan perumahan. Sumber dana bersumber dari penerbitan obligasi dan surat utang lainnya untuk digunakan sebagai sumber dana penyaluran pinjaman. Program penjaminan terhadap efek beragun aset pembiayaan perumahan dan surat utang yang diterbitkan. Program pelatihan dan advisory untuk meningkatkan kemampuan personil dan infrastruktur lembaga penyalur pembiayaan perumahan. Penyediaan pedoman dan standar dokumen pembiayaan perumahan untuk memberikan guidance bagi lembaga penyalur pembiayaan perumahan. Selain menyediakan pendanaan jangka panjang konvensional, SMF juga mendorong pertumbuhan bisnis pembiayaan perumahan di sektor pendanaan syariah. SMF juga berperan sebagai Special Mission Vehicle pemerintah melalui berbagai penugasan khusus yang dilakukan sehingga bisa memberikan dampak positif terhadap aspek sosial dan ekonomi masyarakat. Menurunkan beban fiskal pemerintah dalam program rumah bersubsidi bagi masyarakat berpenghasilan rendah atau MBR. Pembiayaan untuk pengembangan homestay masyarakat di desa tujuan wisata, pembangunan dan perbaikan rumah di daerah kumuh, program pembiayaan perumahan pasca bencana, serta program-program mendatang yang menghasilkan multiplier efek terhadap pertumbuhan ekonomi di Indonesia.
Kami perlu sekali perusahaan seperti SMF yang punya visi mulia buat menyediakan rumah yang layak dan terjangkau. Pedagang kecil seperti saya sangat terbantu bisa punya rumah.
Saya sudah lama pengen punya rumah sendiri buat keluarga. Tapi susah banget karena pendapatan saya nggak tetap. Berkat SMF, akhirnya kita sampai juga punya rumah sendiri.
SMF akan terus